Hello and welcome to the Tank Club. I've been a New World player since launch with kind of up and down activity, but I've dived in and I've played it solidly for the past few months and I've really enjoyed getting to grips with the game and all the details, learning about tanking, the big differences with how tanking works in New World compared to other MMO games. Now there are a couple of real roadblock issues that I wanted to put forward today to see what other people think and maybe even see some adjustments in the future from Amazon Games. You can kind of tell that tanking was a late addition to the game, especially if we consider PvE tanking. Now New World was intended originally to be an exclusively PvP based game. This decision was later changed, and as the past year of the game has progressed, the game has improved and more PvE content has been added on a regular basis. So the way that tanking works in this game feels like it was kind of a rushed, last minute kind of thing. It wasn't really a long thought out process based on how tanking should function for PvE in an MMO. It was more of a last minute decision on the back of the fact that people didn't want a PvP exclusive game. I do find New World tanking somewhat refreshing in the way that it's very active. You don't just stand there holding block while the boss rains down the pain on you. It's a very different and enjoyable experience to tank PvE content in New World, where you have a very limited option of blocking, especially against hard bosses, and you're expected to bring buffs, debuffs, and even DPS as a tank. It's hard to become bored with this style of active tanking. If you compare it to a more classic MMO tank style of maintaining threat and permablocking, New World does offer a very enjoyable method of tanking. There are two main issues I have overall with tanking, and both of these things haven't changed over the past year. I find it quite hard to believe that more people haven't been discouraged from tanking because of these two main things. There are a couple of other things I'm going to mention as well, but we're looking at the two big factors that are kind of roadblocks for tanking. So number one is collision. Literally the worst thing about New World from a PvE tank perspective is the collision. It's virtually impossible to position enemies or hold aggro of an enemy facing a certain direction. You run into combat, you gain aggro of a boss, and then you slide around the floor and the boss will run through you and spin you around doing all kinds of crazy stuff. Now even if you're not blocking, the boss will still kind of go through your character and mess up the positioning based on the attacks that it's doing as well. Now I like to stay on my toes and keep active, but the way that collision works with enemies, especially bosses, just doesn't make sense. So this issue is mostly prominent in expeditions when dealing with larger bosses, and it seems like a combination of problems relating to the hitbox and the size of the enemy. So I have no issue with a boss which is 5 times my size being able to control my tiny little tank character and dominate the positioning of a fight. It just seems really bad how bosses will virtually clip through you and mess up the positioning of your entire group because they will suddenly doing a 180-degree turn and now facing the group. I don't think there is an issue where you have a boss that performs mechanics that force your group to stay on their toes and pay attention. The annoying part is when your group are stacked up behind the boss like they're supposed to, only for then the boss to kind of make your character slide around the floor like you're doing a Michael Jackson moonwalk. You spin around, you cleave your whole group to death with one shot, and then obviously it's not good. Granted, this happens less often in groups where people know what they're doing because they tend to expect this to happen from previous bad experiences and will play with more range or react quicker to the situation, but the issue is that there should be better definition on the player and the boss's hitbox, and your character should not be sliding around the floor holding block. I would rather larger bosses kind of threw my character flying through the air or staggered me when they are much larger rather than the poor collision and the sliding around that we currently have. So this one thing alone, if adjusted, would make tanking unbelievably way more fun. We would see a lot more capable tanks, which would make the PvE side of the game more enjoyable for everyone. Being able to position bosses a little bit better and get more routine in how fights perform from the tank POV would really increase the base level of tank performance in the game. Currently, it's hard to say you should fight this boss in this way because the boss will change position and move and adjust, and you just don't have enough control over how to do each fight. So it's hard for a content creator like myself to advise people how to do certain expeditions and guide them on how they should play a certain fight and how they should position a fight when you have very little control over how a boss moves and reacts to different situations. So that is the main thing. Collision is one of the big things I would love to see changed. The second issue isn't quite as major as the collision thing. It's something that I found difficult to get used to. and this is reactionary blocking. So as a tank, I like to be active in fights and outputting as many benefits to my group and myself. This is sometimes hard to do when there is a delay on blocking. It may be due to the fact that you can't like cut off the animation of a skill or a light and heavy attack as you can in games like The Elder Scrolls Online, for an example. In that game, you can be casting a skill, but if you block, it would prioritize the block or cancel the skill or animation to apply the block. And it feels somewhat smoother when you're pushing damage or trying to output skills and debuffs and then reactionary block when an attack is about to happen. But in New World, you almost need to know when some of the attacks are about to happen and anticipate it a little while before it happens. So when I see a boss about to do a heavy attack and they have the white glow around them, I already need to be blocking to actually block the attack. I can't just hold up block at the last second and rely on my quick reactions to make the most of every action every second. I would like to see some benefits to playing with more reliance on reactions rather than long-winded like anticipation. Okay, the last couple of little things. So being able to aggro enemies and then run with it for a few seconds so it follows you to another location would be really nice, rather than they immediately run off after a second, or being able to like pull PvE enemies over a longer distance would literally be a dream when it comes to ad pulls. Currently you've got things like the Great Axe which stack enemies, but the radius that they do that is absolutely tiny. It's quite limiting on ways to aggro and stack multiple spread out enemies, and this seems to cause a lot of issues when doing content with newer tanks especially. When you have them running around a large room trying to taunt multiple enemies or create threat for aggro, and then it's easily lost when you move away for a few seconds. You've even got some tanks, they don't even bother. And group members are killed by archers, and the healer's killed by an archer or a mage at the back edges of the room. Maybe some kind of heart rune that can pull PvE enemies within sort of like a 15-meter radius, so you can kind of pull everything into a bit of a stack. Maybe not have the option of crowd control, but it like chains it in. Or a heart rune that can cause a bigger range AoE taunt for 5 seconds, so that it's like you're able to control a whole room, because a lot of the expeditions are very, very wide areas. It's not like a narrow pathway where you've got 4 or 5 things and you can just pull them in and you can hold them. Like a lot of the areas in these expeditions are very spread out. There's quite a lot of range. It makes things very, very difficult. So having maybe a heart rune that does an AoE taunt for 5 seconds, so you can kind of get everything aggroed and then pull it into a bit of a stack at least, so that you can maintain your threat so they're not attacking your group, would be fantastic. And it would be great for new players especially. It'd add some level of control to fights. It would add some level of control for tanks so they can perform their role more efficiently and more effectively. And finally, we've got gear perks. There are kind of like 3 grinds in New World. The first one is getting level 1 to 60. Then you've got the gear score expertise grind. And then once you've done all that, you then have the gear grind. So trying to find useful gear that has the best stats and perks is virtually impossible. You have to kind of go into content to find specific pieces of gear that have the gear perks that you want. But often, some of these gear sets that you need, you can only get from doing expedition. So let's say you want a gear set that's got corrupted ward on it for a tank, and you want refreshing on there as well. That gear set, to get those exact these exact perks, can only be found in a mutated expedition, but you can't really do the mutated expeditions until you've got that gear. So it doesn't really make sense that you've got to do the mutations to get the gear you need to do the mutations. Like the alternative ways of getting that gear isn't that great. And then when you look at the fact crafting isn't a guarantee, isn't easy, like it takes a lot of a grind to level up your crafting so that you can craft the gear to get it in a high enough gear score, and then you need golden scarabs to guarantee the 2 traits, you need timeless shards to get the guarantee. Do you know what I mean? It's a lot of effort to craft the gear as well. The random drops that you get from chests and things like that just doesn't make sense. Trying to find useful gear that has the best stats and perks is virtually impossible, and it's made worse that when you find gear that has like a PvP perk combined with a PvE perk. So you'll have a trait on it that says PvP only, and then that's combined with your corrupted ward or your lost ward, a PvE perk. I just find it kind of frustrating and pointless that they would have gear sets that have those 2 things attached. Other MMO games have realised this over time. Obviously, you don't want everyone to have all the best gear immediately, but people don't want to spend thousands of hours grinding out gear or collecting materials to craft gear that ends up being useless. It builds high levels of frustration. Some adjustments to which perks can be combined would be really, really helpful. As a tank, you kind of need 4 sets of gear. So at the minute, it's going to take you a ton of time to get a Corrupted Ward set, a Lost Ward set, an Ancient Ward set, an Angry Earth set. You need 4 sets of gear, and then you've got the risk of having a set with just a ward on, and then the other perks are useless. So taking away some PvP perks from there would make a massive, massive difference. You're also going to be wanting different jewelry, weapons, shields. It's an excruciatingly time-consuming thing to get all that gear. It's hard to get your foot in the door on those mutated expeditions when you keep picking up gear that has Corrupted Ward with a PvP set, for example, and 30 intelligence when you're a strength build. So a little bit of a rework in preventing some perk combinations would make it much less tedious, or making some better gear options drop from accessible sources, so like overland bosses, some elite areas that don't require you to actually have the gear already would make more sense. It's no good having like Corrupted Ward and refreshing gear dropping from doing a mutated expedition when you need that gear to get in there in the first place. So that is really it for this video. Those are my kind of suggestions on how we could potentially improve tanking in New World. If you've got any suggestions of your own, post them in the comments below. I'd love to hear what everyone else's thoughts are on these suggestions, and obviously listen to what your suggestions are as well. For all your tank content, make sure you check out thetankclub.com. We've got lots of information about New World tanking, with more coming every single day. If you'd like to support the Tank Club, then you can do so on Patreon for as little as £3 a month. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye for now.